For his entire adult life, he's been at the heart of history in an historic land.
We cannot make the world perfect. What we can is to keep the world alive.
He'll talk us through the issues that plague his nation.
What do you think? It makes us happy to see civilians die? No. It makes us happy to see the Gazans suffering? No.
He'll reveal his take on the mysterious death of Yasser Arafat.
We could have killed him and say it's an accident. No. There were clear orders not to do so, and we wouldn't do it.
And he'll describe the worst moment of his career.
I felt like somebody cut my body in half.
My guest tonight is his country's eldest statesman, Israeli President Shimon Peres, aged 89.
How are you? Long time no see.
Lovely to see you. It's great to see you.
Great seeing you.
And looking younger every time.
You.
You.
Me.
The President of the United States.
As Israel's foreign minister, he was there on the White House lawn that day on September the 13th, 1993. Beside him was his Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin, and making history with them, Yasser Arafat, the leader of the Palestine Liberation Organization.
Today, we bear witness to an extraordinary act in one of history's defining dramas.
Their goal? Peace. Peres and the others were hoping to put an end to more than 50 years of conflict.
Let us bid once and for all farewell to wars.
For Shimon Peres, it was a long way from where he had started out, in the small village of Wisznaiva in eastern Poland.
We didn't have electricity. My father was well-to-do, so he bought a radio on batteries. And he operated the radio on Saturday, which was against our law. So I broke the radio. And that's one of the memories that others remember and I do. I was very religious because my grandfather was a rabbi. And he educated me to be religious. My parents were not as religious as that. They were more modern, more free, but I stood on guard.
You came to Israel from Poland in 1934.
Right. Most of my family came here to Israel. We were a Zionist, small shtetl, small place for the Jewish people. And half of my family, including my mother, my father, came into Israel, and with me and my brother. In Israel, I was like a reborn person. Everything changed.
Yeah.
I felt from the very first day that I can remember that I belong to a different country, that I'm part of Israel. The sky, the panorama, the people, totally different world. From the gray skies of Wisznaiva to the blue skies of Israel, it's a very long way.
For the young Peres in Palestine, the skies may have been blue. In Poland, the forecast was for storm. It was a bad time to be a European Jew. And in 1942, Shimon Peres's Polish relatives, like so many Jews throughout Europe, went silent.
Only in 1945 we learned what happened. My grandfather, who raised me, who I admired, his wife, and the young boy that remained there to support them at their old age, remained there as well. And they were called, or they were pushed with the rest of the people in the small shtetl to the synagogue that was built of wooden structure. They pushed them in the synagogue. My grandfather went ahead with a talis on his head, and they closed the synagogue and they burned them alive, the Nazis. Nothing was remained.
When the war finally ended, the scale of the atrocities became clear. Perez returned to his home village in Poland and was confronted with the reality of Hitler's dream of eliminating every Jew in Europe.
The only thing that remained, I came to visit there later on, is there was a well next to our home, so water doesn't burn. That was the only remnant of my childhood. And I went to the well, I tasted the water, and that was the only taste of my childhood.
For surviving Jews of Perez's generation, and every generation thereafter, the Holocaust was to become the defining event of history. Never again could this be allowed to happen. In Palestine, Jews would try and ensure that they were immune from whatever history might throw at them in the future. The fact that Palestine was not exclusively theirs to have and to hold was a detail that simply had to be overcome. It was the beginning of a lifetime in politics for Shimon Peres.
Your first hero was David Ben-Gurion, was it?
Yes. That when I came to Israel, I didn't meet him, but I read. And I felt here is a man that tells the truth.
For Zionists like Peres, David Ben-Gurion was a visionary who would lead the Jews from British rule to the Promised Land. Palestine's Arabs viewed him differently, as a robber who was out to steal their homes and their heritage.
Ben-Gurion fought like hell. He was alone. He insisted there would be just one government, just one army, just one rifle. Otherwise, maybe we too would never achieve independence.
While the British tried to control the situation in Palestine, the Jews formed a variety of militant groups to fight for independence and to defend themselves against the Arabs. Peres joined the Haganah, but it was the more violent Irgun under Menachem Begin, later to become the 6th Prime Minister of Israel, that turned to terror. On July the 22nd, 1946, the group bombed Jerusalem's King David Hotel. 91 people were killed, 54 of them innocent civilians.
Do you remember the events of the King David and what followed?
I surely do. I remember the event very clearly and very vividly. The sum up was the regret exceeded the joy.
Exceeded the joy.
Yes. Look, to kill innocent people is always a tragedy, not only for the people who are being killed, but also for the people that caused their killing. I regret it. You know, in the defense of the people who did it, the only thing I can really say is they didn't plan to kill so many people. But that's the problem with all wars and all violence. The results are never the way you plan. And that's one of those occasions. You can be developed in arms as you can be developed in the economy, unfortunately. And then you don't need even armies. Today you have terror without armies. There is no way to justify terror. It's crazy. It's crazy. So it was and remains a controversial part in our history.
Very controversial. But less than 3 years later, following a sustained terror campaign, the attacks bore fruit.
David Ben-Gurion, Prime Minister of Israel, goes to preside over the proclamation of the new Jewish state. In Tel Aviv, there's jubilant rejoicing. Everywhere, the flag of Israel is displayed.
So the Jews had their homeland. But the cost was to be more than half a century of conflict, with no end in sight. They immediately set about securing their new nation.
With Muslims warring against the establishment of a Jewish state, the soldiers of Israel equipped themselves with munitions they seized, armament of every sort. The first immigrant ship has arrived at the port of Haifa, the first to come to the new Jewish state from abroad. This is their goal, the promised land. All able-bodied men among them are ordered into the ranks of Haganah, the Jewish militia defending Israel.
This and this were never going to happen again. From now on, the Jewish state's best means of defense would be offense, with as much force as it had at its disposal.
The first operation was against Sinai in 1956 with the French and the British. The war lasted for 100 days. We lost 140 lives of our soldiers. And the victory was unbelievable. Such a decisive victory by a small army. It amazed the whole world.
And then, of course, in 1967 came a major victory for Israel in the Six-Day War.
In 1967, it was almost a repetition of 1956.
At this moment, there is an Israeli attack being mounted on Gaza, and it looks as though the Israelis are trying to cut off the Gaza Strip from the rest of Egypt.
It was a classic victory. In just 6 days, Israeli forces conquered the armies of Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, and they now occupied the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights, as well as the jewel of them all, the entire holy city of Jerusalem. But it was to lead to trouble.
We demand that everybody should be seated.
The American girl here, could she tell us how the passengers are?
We're very crowded, and I think the women, and especially the children, are very restless.
Palestinians, ejected from their homes and their land, resorted to the same methods the Zionists had once used so effectively against the British. So does Perez acknowledge that terror can work?
We know situations where terrorists can become and do become freedom fighters, and then the president of a new nation.
Yes, but we know also examples when they don't, like Al-Qaeda. I mean, there are different precedents. The problem with terrorists, they have different motives. Some of them are religious, some of them national, some of them are out of reason. You know, terrorism doesn't have a rationale. They're irrational. What do they want?
In this case, what the Palestinians wanted, of course, was simple. They wanted their land back. But it wasn't just what Israel had taken in 1948 and then in 1967. It was what they had been doing since then with the land they now occupied. Israel had been building settlements for Jewish occupiers.
You were very important and central, really, to the decision to go with the settlements. And you supported them in those days, didn't you?
No. We were against 40 million Arabs. We hardly had an army. The Arabs have 7 armies. So we used all our settlements as paramilitary to defend. And the weak point was in Jerusalem. So this settlement in Jerusalem, next to Jerusalem, Ofra, that I suggested to establish, was to defend Jerusalem. And the settlements were double purpose, to cultivate the land and to defend the places, to defend them. In that particular case of Ofra, we wanted to have a radar station next to Jerusalem. So we made a settlement around the radar station to defend us. We didn't want to take over the land.
Perez may not have wanted to take over the land, but others had bigger plans.
We have to have extra land. If we succeed in achieving this and get more land, we can build new settlements. the Jewish proportion of the population here will be sufficiently great that we can prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state.
I want to say something that people don't understand about the settlements. Until 1977, you know how many settlers and settlements were in Israel? I'll tell you. 22 settlements, 6,000 settlers, that's all. After the Likud took over in 1977, they had a different view. And they started settlements in a large way. The problem with the settlements started when it went into great numbers, in 100,000, 200,000, 300,000.
Today, nearly 600,000 Jews live in settlements in the occupied territories. And violence and the settlements have gone hand in hand from the beginning. In 1987, Palestinians launched an uprising, or intifada. As the violence escalated, Israel met force with force. Peres was at the heart of the response.
What do you think? It makes us happy to see a civilian die? No. It makes us happy to see the Gazans suffering? No. The Arabs are not our enemies. The Muslims are not our enemies. We don't have enemies, we have dangers.
If Israelis only have dangers, not enemies, today Peres acknowledges that he and his colleagues in power made a terrible error in the aftermath of their 1967 triumph.
I think we went into a sort of an euphoria. The victory was so great that all of us forgot what to do. And instead of using it to translate the military victory into a political victory means peace, we postponed it. That was our great mistake.
In 1993, the spiraling death toll on both sides led Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and his Foreign Secretary, Shimon Peres, to a groundbreaking decision. Secretly, they opened negotiations with the Palestine Liberation Organization.
One of the problems of politics, why politics is not considered so high in our times, is because many politicians claim that they know how to make the world perfect. We cannot make the world perfect. What we can is to keep the world alive. To keep alive, whether you are a couple or a nation, you have to compromise. And the real sense of politics is compromise. If somebody wants to have full agreement before we'll start, there will never be a start. We have to go to the table knowing there are different points of reference and different ideas. And we have to find a common ground.
The man on the other side of the table to Peres and the Israelis was their enemy of more than 30 years, Yasser Arafat.
Did you ever trust Yasser Arafat? What was the relationship?
It's not a matter of trust, it's a matter of understanding. We developed a very good personal relationship. I would never argue with him in front of anybody else. But when we were alone, I wouldn't spare my tongue. And he liked it.
I am here to fight and to win.
Arafat was on one hand very cunning, on the other hand very dreamy like a child. And I spoke with him about Lincoln. I spoke with him about Ben-Gurion. You have to unite your people, otherwise they'll bring you down. And he agreed, but he didn't act. I knew that without him we couldn't start, but I was in doubt that with him we can conclude.
Nobody can squeeze me to surrender.
He wanted to be a Napoleon and a Gandhi at the same time. A man that makes peace and a man that wins war. There are two things in life that you cannot achieve unless you close a little bit your eyes. It's peace and love. It's a contradiction, so it is a matter of trust.
In September 1993, that trust appeared to pay off.
President Clinton led them out, before them 3,000 guests, to witness what their host called a brave gamble that the future can be better than the past.
Yesterday, a dream. Today, a commitment.
We who have fought against you, the Palestinians, we say to you today, in a loud and a clear voice, enough of blood and tears. Enough! The time for peace has come.
In the crowd, they wept. But nothing would symbolize this newborn peace more fully than a handshake. You could feel the crowd willing it. And it came. It was a gesture to shake the Middle East and bring the world gathered here to its feet.
The gold medal and the diploma.
For their achievement, Rabin, Peres and Arafat were jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1994. But back in Israel, the country was torn between those who supported Peres and Rabin and the right wing, who wanted nothing less than total victory over the Palestinians.
We have had to fight because the victory was never great. I mean, it was a difference of 1 or 2 votes, and the criticism against Rabin and myself were tremendous. They accused us as betrayals.
The fragile nature of the peace was recognized by Yasser Arafat too.
There are many enemies against the peace process, and for this we call it the peace of the braves. And we are in need of all our efforts.
The accusations against Rabin were outrageous. They show pictures of him dressed in a Nazi uniform.
To counter the criticism and to celebrate the Oslo Accords, Peres and Rabin decided to hold a peace rally for their supporters.
Rabin himself was a man that has his own doubts. Before this gathering that we planned in Tel Aviv for peace, against violence, Rabin wasn't sure that there will people will come to support us. He was very skeptical. And he called me up and said, Shimon, let's do something about it. So we organized it.
On the evening of the 4th of November 1995, more than 100,000 Israelis marched for peace.
It came out that this was the largest gathering for peace in Israel.
Peres and Rabin were triumphant. With a huge gathering like this celebrating peace, what could possibly go wrong? I'm here in Jerusalem with Shimon Peres, the President of Israel.
How many presidents have there been of Israel?
I'm the 9th.
With more than 65 years in Israeli politics, he's seen it all.
That moment where you're thinking hopes of peace are dashed?
He says he's an optimist.
Do you hope to see peace in your time?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
But his views on Palestinians are defiant.
They are self-victimizing. They victimize themselves.
There are lines he won't cross, people he won't meet.
You cannot combine fire and water. Hamas is for the continuation of war.
Towards the end of a 7-year presidency, his hopes for his legacy are modest.
What would you like people to say about you after you've gone?
I would like that somebody will say, I saved the life of one child. That will satisfy me.
In 1994, Shimon Peres, PLO leader Yasser Arafat, and Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin won the Nobel Peace Prize. it looked as if negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians were bearing fruit. Peace seemed a real possibility. But right-wing Israelis condemned the peace deal, including proposals to give land to the Palestinians. And they hated Rabin and Peres for agreeing to it. To cement the cause of peace in the face of this hostility, Shimon Peres and Yitzhak Rabin organized their massive rally for their supporters in Tel Aviv on November the 4th, 1995.
What are your memories of the night?
The whole evening was a demonstration of unity between the two of us. It was the happiest day of Rabin in his life. I know him for a long time. We worked together. We were a team, and also we were opponents at the same time. You know, there is a pool below the terrace where we were standing, and youngsters jumped in the water with their dresses, and they praised Rabin, they praised me, they supported us. I never heard him sing that night. I never saw him embracing people. He embraced me like never before. He was really happy because there was many young people. He was the happiest man.
By 9:30, as the party ended, it looked like a huge triumph.
And then when we departed at the end of the gathering, I asked him, Yitzhak, did you thank the people that organized it? Oh, he says, my God, I forgot it. So he went back. I started to go down on my way. My car stood before his car. And when I saw his driver, I says, where is Yitzhak? He says, here is he. I turned my head, and I saw him coming down the steps. He was not very, very far from me, very close. And then I heard the 3 shots. My guards took me by force. They pushed me to the car and started to drive like crazy. Says, just a minute, we are driving. I want to see Yitzhak to say hello. No, they didn't let me down. On my way, I asked him, where is Yitzhak? I felt something wrong is happening.
Something was very wrong. Yigal Amir, a right-wing Israeli Jew, had fired 3 shots from a Beretta pistol, hitting Rabin twice. Amir was enraged that the occupied territories would be given away, and for him, the peace process was no more than an Israeli capitulation.
I came to the hospital. Nobody knew exactly what happened. They knew that Yitzhak was hit. And Leah, his wife, was there. The members of the governments were there, and thousands of people were around, praying and asking what's happening. Then the head of the hospital came to me and whispered in my ears, he's dead. I felt like somebody cut my body in half. So I called in Leah, told her the bad news. And the 2 of us went up to the operation room where he was lying covered, most of his body. His face was tranquil, almost smiling. So Leah kissed him, I kissed him. And then we told the people what happened. And you know, like the whole nation started to cry.
הוא נרצח בקרב על השלום. החייל הזה שעבר הרבה מלחמות, נרצח בקרב על השלום, והוא לא הצליח. הרמטכ"ל הזה נרגע.
The shock of the event spread far beyond Israel. The other leaders involved in the peace process were visibly moved.
Because words cannot express my true feelings, let me just say, Shalom, Haver. Goodbye, friend.
I am very sad and very shocked for this awful and terrible crime against one of the brave leaders of Israel.
So the very same night, the government met and they appointed me as his successor. And I thought what to do. I didn't want to bring to a civil war. It was very close. The accusation, the emotions were so high.
At that moment, were you thinking hopes of peace are dashed?
I don't think I thought in that term. I thought I was taken by the tragedy that occupied my mind. I didn't calculate. But I know that I have to avoid a split that will not permit us to remain together.
במוצאי שבת האחרונה שילבנו זרועות. שרנו ביחד את שיר השלום. חשתי רוממות ברוחך.
Rabin's funeral, world leaders joined the family to share their grief.
שלום, אחי הבכור, מביא השלום.
And Shimon Peres, now the new Prime Minister, vowed to continue with the peace process that had cost his closest ally his life.
אנחנו נוסיף לשאת שלום גדול זה, ושרצית בחייך.
Israel was clearly divided. The assassination, coolly recreated by Amir during his trial, had the desired effect of throwing the peace process into chaos. For many Palestinians left with nothing but broken promises, the only answer seemed to lie in violence, however much the odds seemed stacked against them.
The number of, for instance, Palestinians who've been killed in Gaza is far, far, far greater than the number of Israelis who've been killed. All of these...
Right, but there is another difference. We didn't start shooting at them. They could have avoided all the lives of them. If they wouldn't shoot, we wouldn't shoot either. So they took the risk. They cannot take the risk and then complain. We are better organized, we have better shelters. Yes. So why are they firing? If they wouldn't fire, nobody would be killed, not a single man, not a single child. They don't have shelters, and furthermore, they put their rockets in civilian homes, which makes it even worse. And we are extremely careful not to kill civilians.
But the toll of civilians has been very high in Gaza, hasn't it?
Because we have had to defend ourselves. And they were undefended. In the last confrontation in Gaza, I think there were 140 people killed. Considering the nature of the war, it could have been worse.
In a bid to stem the cycle of violence and counter-violence, in 2005, Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon promised a bold move. Gaza would be handed over to the Palestinians and all the Israeli settlements there would be dismantled.
אבל מה שקורה זה תחת כיבוש. להחזיק 3.5 מיליון פלסטינים תחת כיבוש, לפי דעתי זה דבר גרוע.
Ariel Sharon, and I supported him. That was the reason why I went with him. Said we have to leave Gaza and let it to the Arabs, which we did. There were thousands of settlers, and they were forced to leave. Israel has mobilized 70,000 policemen to do so. So we left Gaza. It cost us $2.5 billion to do this. We weren't forced, it was our choice.
If this was unpopular among Israelis, it also did little to satisfy the Palestinians. Over the years, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians had lost their homes to Israel with no right of return. Their borders were controlled. Their capital was denied to them. Their anger was undiminished.
We were shocked once we left Gaza. Gaza became a base to shoot at us. Why? And this is still overshadowing the solution in the West Bank. The people who oppose the two-state solution say, look, we shall leave the West Bank, it will be repeated the same way like in Gaza. So it makes our life very difficult. Gaza, we hoped it will be a solution, instead it became an obstacle.
To the Israelis, the obstacle is Hamas, the militant group dedicated to eliminating the state of Israel, but elected democratically by the people of Gaza to govern over them. The West Bank is another matter, run by the more conciliatory Fatah party under the leadership of Mahmoud Abbas, or Abu Mazen, as he's also known.
Very befriended with Abu Mazen, Abbas. I have him the highest respect. I think he's a serious man.
You have a real relationship?
Yes, I respect him. The two of us signed the Oslo Agreement in Washington, he and myself. And I have the highest respect for him. And I think it's possible to make peace with him. I don't share any other view. I never changed my mind.
For all that Perez and the Israelis put their faith in Abbas to make peace, the problem for them is that he doesn't carry the entire Palestinian peoples with him. Many support Hamas's far more aggressive policies.
He didn't make, and I am in doubt if he'll make peace with Hamas. No chance. Because you cannot combine fire and water. Hamas is for the continuation of war. We would recognize Hamas. If Hamas would recognize the demands of the quartet, not of Israel, which were 3 points: stop terror, recognize Israel, go into negotiations. They refuse.
The Palestinians have lived for more than 60 years under what they see as Israeli domination and aggression. The response of Hamas is to fire rockets into Israel. For all Yasser Arafat's perceived faults, does Shimon Peres sometimes secretly miss his old sparring partner?
And you know, Arafat from time to time made surprising decisions in our favor. So you ask me if I trust him, I try to understand him.
Right now, Yasser Arafat's body has been exhumed recently, being tested for possible poisoning and so on. Is there any possibility, do you think, that that he was assassinated either by Israel or by somebody else?
No. Not the slightest. Look, if Israel would like to assassinate him, there were so many occasions. You know, when he was forced to leave Lebanon, he was maybe 50 meters from our soldiers.
It was a sad day for Yasser Arafat, and the people of West Beirut came to say goodbye to him.
They could have killed him.
The first call
and say it's an accident. No. There were clear orders not to do so, and we wouldn't do it.
Following a policy reminiscent of those same ghettos in which Jews were virtually imprisoned in Europe 70 years ago, Israel now builds fences and walls enclosing their Palestinian neighbours in Gaza and the West Bank. Checkpoints delay journeys for hours, and the retaliatory war of words and weapons continues unabated. To Shimon Peres, the blame lies all on one side.
Stop shooting, there won't be shooting. Stop killing, there won't be killing. Why are you doing it? I'm asking myself, what is their purpose? Tell me. Why are they shooting? Give me one good reason. Why? What for?
Well, they're trying to respond to what they regard as the aggression of Israel against them.
There is no Israeli aggression. There are no Israelis in Gaza. The sea was open. The roads were open. Everything was open. No restriction.
People looking at this Middle Eastern situation do see the Palestinians as the victims at the moment and Israel as the bullies at the moment.
They are self-victimizing. They victimize themselves. They didn't push us out of Gaza. We took the initiative. We did it one-sidedly. What do they want? It could have happened exactly the same in the West Bank. They're a victim of their own mistakes, unnecessarily.
But Palestine didn't look quite so much like a victim in November 2012, when Mahmoud Abbas demanded and received statehood, albeit non-member statehood, for his nation at the UN.
I think he made a mistake, because we were not against the principle. The argument was about the timing, that's all. What they did is a unilateral march. And I told them, wait a little bit. There were elections in America. There are elections in Israel. Let's try to reach an agreement. But he felt that he was betrayed by the rest of the world, by the Americans, by us, by the Arabs. And he felt he has to do something which is dramatic.
Israel's response was also dramatic.
היום אנחנו בונים ונמשיך לבנות בירושלים ובכל המקומות שנמצאים על מפת האינטרסים האסטרטגיים של מדינת ישראל.
The announcement of 3,000 expansion in the settlements, that looks like aggression or bullying, doesn't it?
The Prime Minister announced that he permitted to plan the 3,000 settlers, not to implement. For the last 13 years, it's not the first time that such a permission was announced, but nothing was built.
Nothing may have been built yet, but since the UN decision, Israel has greenlit 5,500 new settlement units. And pressure is mounting on Prime Minister Netanyahu to drop the two-state solution from his re-election platform. Meanwhile, beyond the occupied territories lurks a far more pressing issue for Israel and the world.
Long-range missiles from the Iranian arsenal.
The Israelis say they want a red line drawn. To make the point, the Prime Minister produced a somewhat crude diagram.
Where should a red line be drawn? A red line should be drawn right here.
8 F-16s took off from their home base.
Historically, Israel has acted preemptively to deny nuclear technology to Arab nations.
Led them to the Osirak reactor.
In 1981, it destroyed Iraq's nuclear facilities at Jazeera. 5 years ago, the Israelis hit the Syrian reactor at Al-Kibar.
Shimon, do you think that it is inevitable that there will come a day when Israel will bomb Iran?
Look, Iran is not just a danger to Israel, it's a danger to the world. I have the highest respect for President Obama. What he did until now is he built a coalition with the Europeans and others. Secondly, he adopted the most serious sanctions that anybody did until now. I don't see any reason why Israel should monopolize it. We can go and should go with him and with the coalition.
Recently you said this to Haaretz. There have been periods in my life when I was a hawk, and there have been periods when I was a dove. I was a hawk when I thought there was no chance for peace, and I became a dove when I thought there was a chance for peace. Which are you today?
There is a chance for peace, in spite of all the uneasy situation in the Middle East. It's unsettled. It's a transitional period, but the future belongs to the young. All over the world, your children, my children, they're a new generation. They say, we don't want the wars you went through. We don't want the hatred, the suspicion.
The relationship between youth and the future was never clearer in this troubled region than in the events of 2011.
Has the Arab Spring been good news for Israel or not?
Depends how they will wind up. There were good news as a hope. There are bad news now as a little bit of a disappointment, not only for us, but for them. Our wish, clearly, is the Arab world will get rid of poverty and oppression and hatred.
Do you hope to see peace in your time?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. For two reasons. First of all, the expectancy of life was extended. And secondly, because I see the dynamics and the forces. I think everybody is now going to look for an adaptation for the challenges of the new age. Because we live in a new world with an old mind. We cannot bring the world back. We have to bring our minds ahead. The revolt was introduced and carried by a young generation. And even by biology, the future belongs to the young. And they won't give up.
The 89-year-olds as well.
Well, they are young.
Mr. President, thank you very much. See you in 10 years' time.
Oh, yes, you're in a good shape, as Churchill has said.